Warning, you have just entered the Boldcast, aiming at creating your best self. The Boldcast is hosted by David Kelly, and Hristo Penchev is likely for you. Live your boldest life.
Hello guys, to the second installment of the Boldcast. Hopefully there's more than 3 people listening to us today. I strongly hope so, that you're back after our first episode. I mean, we really believed it was a really good one, so hopefully you thought that as well. How are you today, Dave?
I'm good, man. I've had a good day so far. I didn't sleep so great last night, but for some reason my energy seems to be pretty good, so that's always a good win-win situation.
Did you have a productive day?
Yeah, I got my taxes done, which I'd been dreading because I had like 40 different things I had to do for that. So I always seem like I'm not somebody who usually waits till the last minute to do things, but with taxes I pretty much do that. So I think I'm gonna pay somebody next year.
I think we share some similarities even with this aspect, to be fair.
We don't like busy work. I think that's that's probably why I didn't become an accountant. I think so.
Yeah, it's kind of unnecessary, I guess. But well.
How's your day, man? Productive day for you?
It was productive. It was frustrating. It was enjoyable. So pretty much a very
day.
normal day
Yeah.
for us. You know?
All you got to do now is cry at the end of the night, and I think that's a pretty good day.
This is how I finish my routine every day.
Well, that's actually a great place to start because
it is.
Well, not crying, but hopefully, sometimes crying can be a result of what we're about to talk about here. But you and I pretty regularly talk about anxiety, and I'm interested to see for you, when it's when you notice it starting for you. Is it a recent thing? Is it something that has been there for a long time for you, or is it just something you've always dealt with, or is it just now becoming a thing?
Honestly, I think I've been a very anxious person since I remember. It's always been such a massive trait of my character. I think this is coming from the fact that both you and I'm sure that there are so many people that can relate to that. We're very concentrated on perfecting every single detail of whatever we do in life, Yep. We're so concentrated on achieving the best possible results with whatever we're doing. So, I started noticing being very anxious about the tiniest things, the tiniest aspects of what I do since I was a little kid, I would say.
Right.
And with the time, considering my constantly improving schedule, the more and more intense routine with the time, I just noticed that my anxiety was getting stronger and stronger as well. And at some point, especially the first time when you are having the obstacle of going through this sort of level of anxiety, it's such an overwhelming experience. It massively affects how you feel, how you think. It massively affects every decision that you're considering, regardless of its nature. So, I would say that I'm still struggling with it. I won't lie. I'm teaching myself to control it more, to be in control of the whole process, to not let it be in charge of my decisions and my emotions and my feelings. But it's still a process. I'm still not reaching the levels of control that I want to possess. But it's definitely getting better. Obviously, there's some moments that are really, really bad, really overwhelming as well. And I've noticed that this is happening. And obviously, it makes sense where I've been involved in very stressful routines, in very hectic processes and procedures and whatnot. So, I think it's definitely part of my character. It's definitely something that I strongly believe will always be there somewhere, regardless of how much I control it or how much I'm wanting to deal with it. But rather than in the past where I was so afraid of it, I can say that I'm in a position where I'm just embracing it and I am accepting its effect on me. And I'm just trying to minimize it and just to objectively acknowledge that this is not something that, I should let control me in any way or fashion.
I think that's absolutely, acceptance, I think, is in any really battle or any weakness is has to be the first thing. I mean, I was about to say this is funny. It's not funny. One of my friends was recently in rehab for a drug problem, but anyway, they all basically imply they implement the 12-stage like Alcoholics Anonymous type of thing. And the first stage of that, if I believe, is acceptance. So you have to accept that it's a problem, and if you can accept it's a problem, then you can work to try to find a solution, right? Yeah. But if you don't accept that that you're having a problem of any kind, whether it's anxiety or drug addiction or some other, depression, whatever it is, then how are you going to find a solution? You're not going to be able to, right? So, that's something I think that is definitely a very strong characteristic of myself, being a stubborn person, is to say, oh, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong. This is just like a freak occurrence. It's a one-time thing. And in fact, I guess the biggest difference between me and yourself is anxiety's only become a recent thing for me. I should say become a thing of recent for me. Yeah. And, I guess now that I think about it, I think there's a difference between anxiety and anxiety attacks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I've always had like a little bit of anxiety, but it's never been, I've never really even noticed it. I didn't really start noticing until after I had an anxiety attack. So it wasn't really a huge problem for me until I had the anxiety attack, and I had my first anxiety attack, and I think it was November. Yeah, it was November of last year in 2018, and I was in the studio, and I've thought back to that moment. And I just wondered, that day I had a lot of caffeine and pre-workout and stuff like that. So I wondered if it was from that. But here's the thing, I don't necessarily think so, because I've had other days where I've done, I've had that same kind of caffeine consumption and stuff like that, and I haven't had the problem. So I started noticing that it's something every once in a while when a lot of things are going really well, it'll build up, and then it'll just kind of hit me all at once, and it seems overwhelming, and I don't even really realize it's overwhelming until the anxiety attack happens. I've only had about 3, to be honest with you. The first one, as you said, was terrifying. I mean,
it is
I actually literally thought I was having a heart attack. I had Grant, our producer, drive me to the hospital because I didn't know what was going on. Like, I thought I was going to die. That's how it felt. And I remember Justin, our former drummer, telling me that, anxiety attacks. I remember him always talking about, anxiety attacks feel like you're dying. And I always was like, really? I found that hard to, in my head I was kind of skeptical of that. And then when it happened to me, I was like, yeah, I definitely see what you mean, And it's something, I think anxiety, man, is really underestimated by a lot of people who have never dealt with it. It's impossible to really understand until you deal with it. Depression's a little easier for people to understand just because it's so widely talked about and known about now. But, I never really remembered hearing about anxiety when I was growing up as much.
I still think that the majority of the society is not really aware of the significance of these problems.
Oh,
yeah. And I know that, most of the people nowadays, they're still sort of programmed to neglect the importance of these issues.
Yeah.
And even with the depression, the thing is that nowadays more people are recognizing the importance of depression, but they don't really get it,
Yes.
Because for most of the people, depression is being sad or being miserable. Yeah. And when a normal people is meeting depressed person, they're like, well, why are you depressed? You have a decent life, there's nothing for you to be sad about, or whatever the case might be. But the worst part about depression is that you feel bad and you feel down all the time without any proper reason. Yeah,
exactly.
That's worst
real
case.
Depression.
That's real depression. But back to your point, I think it's the same situation with anxiety. People just don't really understand the importance of this problem, And I think the biggest issue with the type of characters that we are when it comes to anxiety is the fact that being stubborn and being programmed to kind of go through every single difficult thing that we face relentlessly all the time, we kind of, pile up these sort of stressful moments, these bad situations, and at some point subconsciously they just start acting on us without even us expecting them. Right. Yep. And I know, and this is how this sort of anxiety attacks occur, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I was just thinking about this right at the end when you were saying that. I think there's good forms of anxiety sometimes, and there's bad, obviously. The kind we're talking about is the negative type of anxiety, the kind that's a detriment to you as a person, right? Because, there's the kind of anxiety that I don't really get stage fright or like stage nerves before I go on stage or anything like that. But I definitely get, I'm anxious. But that's such a different feeling than having anxiety. Those are two very different things. Because, for a lot of people, I would call that anxiousness like nerves almost in a way, right? Nerves are a good thing. That's how on the other side of those nerves is a lot of growth, right? So if you're getting nervous, I'm sure like before your TED Talk that you gave, you probably had some crazy nerves. You're like, oh man, this thing's being recorded. I can't really mess this up. That's kind of what would be going through my head at least. And, that's a good kind of nervous. If you weren't nervous for that, I mean, there's something wrong with you, that's at least how I see it.
No, that's quite true. But, I've written a whole chapter of my book towards this topic. Shameless plug, by the way. Buy my book right away. But it's pretty much the whole topic of this chapter is just describing the difference between fear and premonitions.
Oh,
and the thing is that obviously anxiety is pretty much fear, right?
Yeah.
But when you have anxiety, when you have fears that are not based on facts and on objective details, you are feeling negative emotions,
Yes.
So, but when you're actually having premonitions, this is your experience telling you what is the right thing to do in a certain situations. And when you're in such a case, you are not experiencing this sort of very negative and very overwhelming experience,
Yeah.
And that's why I'm always saying that you should objectively assess what's the case with you based on how you feel. Because as you've said to your point, and you're perfectly describing the difference between these things. If you're nervous, obviously you're nervous, but you're not experiencing any negative emotions. You're actually pretty much excited, In general, you're actually excited to go through this exciting experience that is in front of you, and that's because you have enough information in your head, you have enough details to know that obviously this is an important moment, but there's nothing for you to worry about, essentially. But when you have fear, the fear is based on the fact that it's pretty much unknown. You're leaving your fears, your expectations to shape the exact idea of the upcoming experience, right? So this is what creates the very negative atmosphere. So there's a way for you to deal with this sort of things, but it just takes such a big level of self-control. So it requires lots of discipline to get to that level, especially if you're easily affected by these sort of things.
That's such a good point, Hristo. And I think that, that's a strong distinction. And, something else I was just thinking about is you mentioned before about depression. Like real depression is you feel awful and you don't know why. Almost every time, every time I've had an anxiety attack, it's been the same kind of thing. I don't know what's causing it as it's happening. I just feel overwhelmed, kind of just like, and I couldn't even put my finger on what it is. And, I'll try to talk through it and I'm like, man, I don't even really know. I don't even know what it is. Eventually I kind of figure it out after a while, but like in the present moment, it doesn't feel as if I could put my finger directly on it. And, I've had some depression bouts myself too. And it's the same thing. It's like, you're sitting there. I think that's the hardest thing with, I know a lot of people that have like clinical depression where they feel just terrible all the time. Like I am not like that, so I'm not even trying. I can't speak about that at all. But I do have phases of time, and I think everybody, to some extent, a lot more people than lead on other people to believe that, you know, they don't have depression. But I think people go through depression phases, and you know, in those, you're just kind of like kicking yourself, and I'm kicking myself, and I'm like, what is going on? Why am I feeling like this? Everything's great in my life. You know, even as much gratitude as I could practice and things like that, even during that phase, it's just something's not clicking. And then eventually something just clicks and it starts working again, and I'm out of it. But, you know, during that time, it's just kind of, it gives me a lot of perspective, at least, on what, you know, some of my friends and other people I know deal with all the time. And I just cannot imagine that. It has to be horrible. Terrible. Yeah. Same thing with anxiety. You know, people have really bad anxiety. Oh.
True. And, you know, I can say that I have pretty strong anxiety, and I definitely experienced large periods of time with depression as well. You know, this is not something that I've talked about, but it's, it's very overwhelming. But, you know, my advice with this has always been, and I've mentioned that before, but don't let this affect your choices. And I'll give you a pretty good example. You know, whenever it comes to important decisions with me, I always have the strongest possible anxiety. I'll doubt everything. You know, every single option seems as a bad one for me. You know? And I'm playing this constant monologue between myself, and I'm playing the devil's advocate in my head as well. And it's just a very, very strange experience. And, you know, that was during the first year in university. I just started doing some journalism work. You know, I was just grasping the experience of being involved in the music industry. It's been a few months, you know. And I was provided with the opportunity to interview a funeral for a friend. You know, which was in a city near me. So, you know, I always have very bad anxiety when it comes to traveling in general. It's completely irrational, I know, but it's just how it works.
Yeah.
And I got this opportunity, and this unlocked such a high level of anxiety with me. I was like, I'm not ready for that. This would be stressful. I would fail. Just wouldn't make sense for me to do it. You know, it doesn't really, you know, have any advantages for me. Why would I do that? It's just a waste of time and money or whatever. So I was just having this sort of really strong dialogue in my head for like 3 days, right? It was so overwhelming, really. And I don't want to sound, you know, as something that won't or whatever, but it's just how it is with me, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Speak your truth, man.
Yeah, and eventually I overcame that. It was very difficult, and I went to the interview, and this was such an eye-opening moment for me. I had one of the best times of my life, you know, and just showed me the importance, you know, just showed me the joy of being in contact with musicians, with artists that understand me. You know, it showcased me a whole another part of life, pretty much, that I can be in touch with the people I have always admired.
Yeah.
And I can be in touch with people who understand me, who are close that way on the same wavelength with, right?
Yeah.
And this interview got me motivated to get involved more with that, to do more interviews, to meet more bands, to be in touch constantly with musicians and so on. So this is pretty much the moment that, you know, shaped my life, even when you think about it, because if I didn't do that interview, I wouldn't be here, you know?
And, you know, that's what I was just going to say. I mean, imagine if you just didn't do that because of how you were feeling. And that's why, to me, you know, something that's really helped me, not just with anxiety, but just my entire life in general, because you and I have always talked about this. We're very emotional people. Arguably, that's why I'm a vocalist. That's part of what I do, because I'm an emotional person, and I'm able to, you know, communicate those emotions. But really, you know, if you're gonna just live by the flying with your emotions constantly, then you're basically a prisoner to them. You're essentially not free, right? the ultimate goal, one of the ultimate goals of my life, and I failed to mention this yesterday, but is freedom. Financial freedom, mental freedom, freedom from what other people think of me, so forth. And if you're going to be just tied to your emotions, then or these moment to moment feelings, even I'll use, then you know what? You're never really going to have much of a life, right? Yeah. So discipline is how you get over that. And one of the greatest things that I've implemented recently is meditation. And I'm going to talk about this a lot on this podcast because it's made such a big impact on my life. I never thought I'd be somebody that would do meditation ever, but even like 10 minutes a day has made such a big impact on my life. And I definitely can, in moments when these things are happening, when I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling nervous or upset and angry or whatever, I can stop and think and go, this is simply an emotion. It's like a neurochemical reaction that's happening in my body. Yeah. I can stop this if I wanted to. But if I want it to stay, I can let it stay. And I can use it to my advantage. Right? So sometimes it's good to feel angry. Sometimes it's good to feel sad because I can take that and I can put that into lyrics or into writing a vocal part or into writing anything or into this podcast, whatever. But it's about being able to evaluate how you're feeling. If you just, if you're just living, that's the difference between being, I'm sorry, I'm tripping over my words a lot here. If that's the difference between being lived and living. So, to be lived is just to be prisoner to all these things, fear, emotions, moment-to-moment feelings. Like, imagine if I was feeling tired like I was before I came on here, and I was just like, Hristo, man, we're not doing this today. I'm tired. I'm going to go take a nap. That's not discipline. We agree to do something. Yeah. We do it. And on the other side of it, I know I'm going to feel better regardless, right?
Same.
Like my energy levels as we're talking here are increasing, and I feel a lot better, and I'm glad we did it, So, but there was a moment in my head where I'm like, I could just take a nap, and then I could. No, that is the difference between being lived and living, because I'm making the choice to overcome those emotions or overcome my moment-to-moment feelings, and that choice and making those choices in that way is implementing discipline into your life.
Exactly.
So meditation is definitely helping me increase my discipline. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I completely agree with everything. I think discipline is the key for everything, because, back to my previous point, I'm still experiencing anxiety and I'm still doubting, every opportunity that I'm presenting with on a daily basis. I was experiencing the same level of anxiety when I got the opportunity to be on TV, when I got the opportunity to have a TED Talk. I had an amazingly big anxiety when I was presented with the opportunity to write the book as well. And every time when I was presented with these sort of opportunities, I was just thinking back to the whole situation that I told you about before. I was like, I know how I felt then, and I know how it turned out eventually.
And so, don't you think that because of how you felt before that made the result so much sweeter, right?
Oh,
because, right? Like that's the thing. Nothing, it's so cliche to say, but like, nothing worth having comes easily.
Yeah.
I think it kind of is what, that saying is aiming for. Like cliches have a lot of truth to them. Pretty much all of them. That's why they're cliches, right?
True.
And if you spend time actually thinking about them, you could see them implemented in your life. And that's definitely something I could see, because if you didn't feel nervous about that interview, then how would you really feel that great afterwards?
Exactly.
Because you transcended that emotion and the negative feelings you had, and you overcame all that stuff. Like, to get in your ar. Another great example from my friend who came from rehab recently, which, by the way, eventually, he's an amazing dude, very smart. It just goes to show that drug addiction has no socioeconomic boundaries at all. But
shout out to your friend.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to drop his name until he wants to. But anyway, he was talking about one of the exercises they went through in rehab was a lot of people, once they've, basically conditioned themselves to have drugs overcome these feelings we're talking about, right? They look at that incorrectly, right? So like if you feel sad and then you go do drugs because you feel sad, there's a lot of steps in between feeling sad and then choosing. So there's a lot of steps, right? You're feeling sad, then you're choosing to go do drugs. You have to get in your car. You have to get the money. You have to go buy them. Then you have to, once you've bought them, you have to do them. Like, it's not just a one-step thing. Like, and the reason I bring that up is because of what you were talking about with the traveling to get to the interview, right? So there were so many steps you had to keep pushing through during that phase. It wasn't as simple as just deciding, I'm going to do it. You had to decide you were going to do it. Then you had to travel to make that happen. You had to prepare for the interview. You had to do the interview. And once you did the interview, you had to post the interview, right? So there's so many different steps. You could have, at any point along that way, you could have said, nope. But every time you said, yes, I'm going to do it. And you kept going forward. And that's really all it is. It's just a bunch of decisions to not let those emotions and feelings and anxiety or depression. Depression is a little different. I don't want to speak about that as much because my experience isn't as high with it. But it's just a choice not to let those things control you. You're in the driver's seat. Put the emotions and anxiety and stuff in the passenger seat along for the ride. We can grab them when we need them, but we don't want to have them driving our car, for lack of a better term. You know, I don't want them flying my plane over the Atlantic.
So well put. And this is actually another very important point, you know, that I wanted to make. And you brought it up very, very accurately. You know, a very important fact that most of the people kind of neglect when it comes to anxiety and depression and stuff like that is the fact that obviously it occurs with, you know, quite emotional oriented people, you know, at least more than the average, right?
Yeah.
And so it's, you know, as it's perceived, these people kind of perceive and accept every emotion 10 times as the regular people do, right?
Yep.
So that's why they experience any negative emotional feeling 10 times the worse. But at the same time, a thought that very much helped me is the fact that I've acknowledged that following the same tendency and following this characteristic trait of my profile, following the same logic, I would experience the positive emotions and the positive experience 10 times better than everyone else, which is quite correct, right?
It's actually scientifically correct. Yeah. No,
exactly.
There's a lot of science behind that. The first person that really turned me on to that was my mom, because she actually is exactly how you and I are. And, you know, she had her doctor tell her at a young age, literally exactly 10, you know, the 10 times thing. That's proven by science.
Amazing.
So, you know, I don't, there's probably a study out there that's going to prove what I just said wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's almost, it's probably like, there's like a spectrum of that, but you know, you've people on the extreme ends of that spectrum. I'd say I'm probably towards more of an extreme end for sure. And, you know, the unfortunate and fortunate part is, at least in my life, that is what makes me, you know, a good artist and communicator through lyrics and stuff like that, because I feel that stuff. So if I didn't feel it, like, it's very hard to look at somebody else's depression or something and be like, yeah, how's that bothering you? Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and write about that. There's no comparison to if you're feeling it and then you can communicate about it, you know?
You know, when I was in high school, obviously just in the midst of my emo period, you know, jamming 3 Days Grace, they just dropped out a song called Pain. And, you know, I was in 8th grade, and there was a line in the song saying, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering it up, but it kind of said, I would rather feel pain than nothing at all.
Yeah.
You know? And I kind of, you know, at the time I was like, I didn't really understand it. You know, it didn't really ring any bells with me. But with the time after, you know, I've got involved into music and I kind of realized what my true passion is, I completely understood that. Because as emotional people, as artists, you know, as people involved in music, we kind of need that creativity. We just need to experience emotions whether they're positive or negative, because this is how we function best. We need something to express. And I think there's nothing worse for an artist or creative person in general to experience than feeling nothing at all, than experience non-emotions.
I mean, I think there's nothing worse for anybody, really, because if you think about it, apathy is really what you're talking about, right? When you're not feeling either emotion, you're talking about apathy. And really, I mean, why would you want that, I'm a big fan of a guy named Aubrey Marcus. He has his own podcast, and he's like a business owner and stuff too. But, he talks about this a lot. And it's like, I'd rather feel pain and suffering and despair and anxiety and things like that than feel nothing, right?
Yes.
I honestly, and I mean that, because I'll tell you exactly why. When I feel like that, on the other side of that, every time, something good comes.
Yes.
Whether it's in business, whether it's in music, whether it's in working out, I learned something about myself. It doesn't matter. I become a stronger person every single time. Yes. But if I just try to end those feelings through, I don't know, anything like drugs or whatever, then that would totally erase what comes on the other side of that. And usually, like you said, it's for every time you're feeling awful, on the other side is positive emotion if you learn how to channel it. I think I always tell people this. When people are like super depressed or super, emotional and stuff like that, I see so much potential in those people, because if you learn how to channel that correctly, you could be so powerful, and you can improve so many people's lives and your own, especially your own life, right? Because if you learn how to take and transcend a negative emotion and a negative experience into a positive experience, I don't think there's anything more useful in life. Seriously. I mean, think about it. No matter what happens to you, you're able to get something out of it. Always.
Yeah.
Because you can't control these things happening to you, but you can control how you react to them. And I'm telling you, when I was in high school, that was the greatest skill I ever learned, was channeling. I was always I'm a very passionate person. Sometimes the passion could turn into anger and emotion and things like that. And anybody who's passionate understands that. And sometimes it's funny, I didn't have 2 closet doors on my closet because I punched them and I broke them and they hadn't been there for years. And the thing is, I learned that is so stupid. There's nothing that comes to that. I'm breaking something. I'm going to break my hand. I'm going to, it's pointless. Why don't I go to the gym? Why don't I write a riff? Why don't I write some lyrics? Why don't I write some thoughts? And once I learned how to do that and conditioned myself to do that, my life totally changed in every single way, man. And because I knew that no matter what was happening to me, I had at minimum 2 things I could do right away that would make me feel better. Writing or playing music, or going to the gym. And 10 years later, I'm still doing both of those. And they are such a major part of my life now. And if I never felt those negative emotions so strongly, it would have never led me to that. So I encourage people, like, whatever it is for you, find how to take those negative emotions and negative experiences and take them and turn them into something. Because I could see how people, what I was talking about with meditation before, I could see how people would get confused and say, well, so what? You're just not supposed to feel any emotion. If you can control how you feel in every situation, then why wouldn't you just not ever feel bad, right?
Yeah. That's
not what I'm saying. I'm saying being able to control that might be the difference between when somebody cuts you off on the road, when you're driving, overreacting to that, or saying, when somebody pisses you off, saying something to them that just should not be said, and it's a heat of the moment thing. That's where meditation comes into play. Save that anger and then channel it later. Just channel it later.
Exactly.
I think there's so much value in that, and I'm seeing that a lot more as I get older. Because before, you couldn't have convinced me to do that.
There's that's so valid as well. There's another part of my book. Shameless plug again. Buy my book.
We should always be talking about it, because it's very relevant to everything we're talking about.
It is, and I'm saying that especially when you're concentrated on self-development, which was a topic that we kind of briefly discussed already. But there's nothing better for you than negative experience, because negative experience, it gets you out of your comfort zone.
Yes.
It presents you with unexpected circumstances that require you for you to take charge of what you do and take big decisions and to really implement your will into action, right? So honestly, this is just to your point. There's so much positives in every sort of situation, especially negative as well, as we're talking about, that you can bring to your benefit. And I'll give another example from my personal experience. Can you guess, I'm asking you, can you guess what's the reason why I started UAC management?
Oh, man. That's something we never talked about.
I know.
I assume it has something to do with... That's a great question. I know that you had some experience playing music yourself, right?
Yeah. No, but I'm asking what caused the emotional state for me to actually listen to the company.
Well, I'll start with the obvious one. Did you have a breakup of some kind in a relationship?
Jesus, you nailed it right away.
Well, the reason I say that is because, no, seriously, and that's, I think it's a great time to pivot into talking about that stuff, because I'd love to hear that story, because every time somebody says something and they make a big life decision like that, it's usually after some sort of major breakup or something like that.
Yeah. I had a massive breakup. This was pretty much during the second year of my university. I met a girl for first time that really understood me. We were on the same wavelength. So for the first time ever, I had an emotional connection with a girl. So it was a very close experience to me, Oh,
absolutely.
And obviously, this ended quite badly, Oof. And as the emotional person I am, and you probably all know that already. But I took it really badly. I took it really hard. I'm talking a few days, I was a complete mess, a complete mess. And there was this one day, I was like, I don't want to be like that. That's pathetic. I'm just laying in my bed and just overthinking about stupid stuff.
That's such an awful feeling. Yeah.
I was like, I just want to do something, and I need to use this energy rather than torturing myself, and just put it in something that can create something positively, right? So this is how it all started, And even my closest friends nowadays, because they know about the whole experience, and they're talking. Well, they're asking me, what's your approach towards that girl now? I mean, are you mad at her for the whole thing or whatnot? And I'm like, there's no way I can be more thankful to her, for this, for the fact that I was in touch with her, because otherwise I wouldn't be here,
Yeah.
And
we wouldn't be having this podcast. I wouldn't even know you, I mean, it's just, the problem is when you're in the heat of that moment, like I just said, it's, even while I'm doing this podcast right now, this is the only time I'm presently existing is in this moment right now. So it's, I can't look forward and look back at the same time. Mm-hmm. I can only look back to, yesterday or what I did before I came here. And then I can make sense of it, right? Mm-hmm. And you can now look back at that breakup you had and see, like, man, if it was not for that, I wouldn't be... I mean, let's face it. You would not be doing anything you're doing right now.
Not at
UAC is kind of what pushed you into this sphere of being bold. I mean, you probably always were like that, but I'm talking about like truly in manifestation in life, right?
Yeah.
And that's why it's always so interesting to me is that, sure. I mean, let's be honest here. When something like that happens, like, it's easy to be like, yeah, as soon as it happens, just go ahead and sit down and start writing about it. No, like, you got to let that stuff eat you up to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Let it kill you a little bit. And even if you don't want to let it kill you, I promise you, if you've never experienced it, it's going to. And but again, on the other side of that is a lot of positivity. Especially, I had this realization the other day that basically, my entire life is a product of things like you're talking about right now. breakups and things. They always have pushed me to be something more and to focus on myself more. Because I guarantee you, when you had that breakup happen, you're like, man, I need to just focus on myself more. I need to just come down, build my own life, and I will attract the right person into my life when the time's right. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, completely.
Virtually every entrepreneur I know who who's become an entrepreneur when they're not, dating somebody or something like that, they all have the same way of looking at that for the most part, because you want to attract the right person in your life. And when I say entrepreneur, I'm using that in a kind of vague sense. I mean, to me, a musician's an entrepreneur. To me, a business owner's an entrepreneur. It's anybody that is willing to take risks, because that's literally what the word entrepreneur means. It means bearer of risk in Latin. And, anybody that's willing to take risks like that. And you want to focus on bringing somebody into your life. I don't care if it's a friend or a girlfriend or if you're a girl, a boyfriend, whatever it is. You better make damn sure that person understands you and gets what you want to aim for in your life. Because just like we talked about in the last episode, most people are just not going to get it. They're not going to align with you. But man, when you find somebody that does, and then it ends or something like that, that's really hard to deal with.
It is.
It's really hard, because there's just not a lot of people out there like that.
Yeah, and because we as entrepreneurs, and I'm using it as the same sense in you as well, just strongly willing people that have certain objectives in life and certain approach towards them. Again, we're successful, and we do what we do because we have the ability to emotionally invest in whatever we do. We completely dedicate ourselves to the case that we're working at, right?
Yeah.
And this includes relationships as well. When we meet a partner of any sort, we do invest in this relationship.
Yes.
Yes. We get dependable on the said person. We get, we rely on them. So there is a very strong connection there. And when this bond is broken, there is a very negative effect on us. And
I have... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was actually finishing. So
no, you just triggered me thinking of somebody that I know. She is somebody I used to work with back when I worked in retail. And, I became pretty close with her. And, when you work in retail, I mean, there's like hours go by where you're just standing there and you don't have anything to talk about. So I inevitably would hear about a lot of the girls' relationships that I was around all the time. And, I try to always tell them, because a lot of them were like my age or like our age. And they just seemed to be so obsessed with trying to find somebody. And I was like, and they were neglecting themselves in the process and focusing on themselves. And I'm like, man, this is such an important time in your life. I mean, my former business partner, this is another thing we can talk about. I don't want to talk about in this episode, but I had a business failure last year. But, I'm super close to my business partner, very similar minded to you and I, super bold dude. And we talk about this all the time. It's like, the 18 to like 25 is such a turning point time period in your life. Not necessarily like you got to be successful by the time you're 25 or something like that, but what you do during that time really sets up the rest of your life in a lot of ways. Yeah. There's always going to be people who, defy the rules and leave corporate life in the middle of, their career, stuff like that. But the large majority of people are gonna decide the path in their life during that time, right? If you're obsessed with finding a partner during that time period, you're gonna neglect yourself and you're not gonna be thinking clearly. And listen, I understand that that's such an important part of life. It's something I struggle with mightily all the time, you know? And because I go through these phases of where I'm so independent, I don't need anybody and blah, blah, and then it just kind of things pile up, and I'm like, man, my life would be so much better if I had somebody in my life. I think everybody that's in our situation goes through that constantly. I mean, everybody I've ever talked to goes through that. But if you're there's that extreme, and then there's the other extreme where you're just constantly looking for somebody. I mean, literally, the one girl I'm talking about, she had a relationship for 3 years. It ended 2 days later. She was on dating sites trying to find not just somebody to, help her forget about the other person.
Yeah.
But somebody to literally date. I'm like, man, that's crazy. Not because you're insane. I understand where you're coming from. You want to feel needed and desired, and I get that, but that's so unhealthy for yourself. You need to
insane.
take time to focus on yourself. And I just never understood that, I've never understood that at all. I can't picture being like that. Maybe that's just because of how I'm wired and how I was brought up and things like that, but that's just so foreign to me. And I think that, if people could just gain some perspective and realize, like, especially at our age now, or younger than us, people that are younger than you and I, we're both 25. And if people could just realize, like, focus on yourself. Be selfish in this point of your life. Because if you're not selfish, you're not going to get the best relationship that you can have. Period. Yeah. You're not going to have the best life that you can have. Use this time to set up your life, and the right person will come into your life at the point necessary. And I know that for a fact because I've watched this happen to other people.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I can't really comprehend the whole mentality of people as the one that you've described as well, because I'm seeing this sort of personalities everywhere, and I just don't understand as well, because I'm like, you do realize that you are dedicating your life, your potential to someone else.
Yes.
It shouldn't be like that. I mean, you should be your own person, develop yourself, reach for your potential, reach your capacity. And fair enough, I completely relate with everything you said. I also have these sort of moments where I don't need anyone, but at the same time, I have these moments where I feel that I would be empowered if I had the right person beside me or whatever. But you should distinguish the needs and the desire for such a person.
Oh, such a good point. Yes. Yes. No. That's so true. Yes. It's such a good point.
It's just such a crucial part, because objectively, if we really needed someone like that, this wouldn't be just a momentum thing. We would be experiencing this every single day. But we're experiencing this need just in certain situations where we would feel down, where we would need emotional support of some sort. But if you're experiencing this need for compassion from a person just in certain cases, this doesn't mean that you need partner. This means that you just need emotional support, which might come from your parents, from your friend, or from your favorite artist as well, for that matter.
Yeah.
So it's just important. Don't dedicate your lives to other people. It's just invest in yourself.
First of all, you're on fire today, man. You're making up for me because I'm having a lackluster showing today. But, seriously, I mean, that's so true. And that's such a good point, because you don't need that. Like, you're not going to die if you don't have a relationship. Yeah. I have my uncle, who is a very successful entrepreneur. He's not married. He's one of the happiest people I know. That's not to say that everybody who's not married is happy. That's not what I'm saying. Just like everybody who's married is not miserable or happy. There's different things, it's cliche, different strokes for different folks or whatever like that. It's true, right? So you don't need that. Which you want that. And I always tried to break that down for her, because she's one of my good friends, the girl I'm talking about, and she just couldn't wrap her mind around it. And I think a lot of it has to come back, like when I think about it, because my sister's very much the way that I am. I think a lot of it comes back to how I was raised. My parents always gave me a lot of support, and have always supported me and made me feel, loved and cared for and things like that. And if you didn't have that experience growing up, I would imagine that you constantly be seeking that, right? Yeah. I mean, it's honestly, again, another cliche, and it's kind of, people joke about it, but it's definitely a real thing. A lot of girls that have bad relationships with their fathers definitely are seeking a relationship
this sort of
with
figure in their life,
because they never had it. Like that's not, and I used to, I had a relationship with somebody before, and she was, when I would make statements like that, she got super offended and say it was sexist. It's not sexist if it's true. It's proven in psychology. So that's not sexist. It's true, And just like there's a lot of men in this world who didn't have good relationships or never had a mother, and they're constantly seeking that presence from a woman. It just it's reality. You're a human being, and there's certain things that we need, right? We don't need to have a relationship. We want to have one. And there's very good reason for that, because there's a lot of good things that can come from it. But you know what's worse than not having a relationship? Having a bad relationship. That's really bad. Having a toxic, bad relationship is not good. And I learned my lesson with that. I had that. I didn't let it go on very long, but I am friends. I know a lot of girls. I'm trying to phrase this in the least offensive way possible. I know a lot of girls that I watch them stay in these horribly toxic relationships, and they never come out of them. They just, for some reason, they won't come out of them. And I always think, and I'm like, you just don't love yourself enough. If you really loved yourself and respected yourself enough, you would never put up with that. For a certain extent, you would put up with it for a little bit. I put up with it for a little bit, but after a while, it's like, man, fuck you. Like, seriously. I mean, not to be rude, but like, I know what I'm worth, and that's what goes back to our last episode when you were talking about self-worth and building yourself up and developing yourself. When you've done that for so long, you have expectations for your life, and in your life, part of those expectations are relationships, whether it's a business partnership, whether it's a client relationship, an intimate relationship, whatever it is, friendship. You start to demand different things, right? You start to demand different expectations because you know what you're worth. And if you just go through these constant cycles of not having that time of individuality to grow, it's very hard to develop that self-worth. It's very hard. One of my best friends, I was the best man in their wedding. They have such a good, they're married. They've been married since we were 21. They have such a good relationship. It's honestly amazing to me, because they've been able to grow as individuals by themselves and collectively together. That is very rare for people our age.
That's amazing, yeah.
Almost everybody I know who's been in like long relationships at a young age, I feel as if they were super smothering relationships. They miss so many growth phases that I went through. I'm not saying that I'm better off than those people because of it. There's things that I missed in relationships, so to speak, that they gained. It's a trade-off. That's what life is. But,
of course.
My friends I'm talking about, they just seem to have figured it out, and I think it's amazing, honestly. In fact, I actually encourage them to start a podcast to talk about that kind of stuff because they've got it nailed down. They've had trouble and hiccups in their relationship, but that's any relationship, right? That's just the way things work. But they've been able to work through those, and they're so much better because of it. And it's amazing to see people grow like that, both as two individuals and collectively as a group. Because too many times in relationships, it's just the individual gets lost, and it's just about the relationship, and that's it, right? So I think that's super important.
Yeah. Firstly, we should invite these guys. I think that would be, a good conversation.
Well, and the friend I'm talking about, who I was the best man in the wedding, he also owns his own company. So,
Fantastic.
And the wife she teaches yoga, she's a job, she's a blog. Like, they're both, that's what I'm saying. Fantastic. They're both super, like, driven people, and they're great people on top of it. They're really good people. And, I'm honored to be their friend, to be honest with you. And it's something that, it's truly amazing to watch. It's amazing because I don't see in my life anybody else really pulling that off my age.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think, it all comes back to emotional maturity, I believe. Especially, when it comes to relationships of any sort. It's, I think, a very big misconception and a very big mistake is the fact that people, especially when it comes to finding the right partner or whatnot, people try to not really go and respect the actual qualities and the actual character of the person that they're interested in, but they're trying to develop their own idea of the said person, to project their absolute ideal version of their partner on the person that they're interested in, which obviously creates such a big discrepancy in terms of qualities, in terms of character and whatnot, and ultimately this brings this very sort of bad negative experiences, which I think is the main problem. As you've said, if you know yourself enough, if you know your qualities, if you know what you need, you'll be able to find what you need rather than just seek for something that you don't even know what exactly you're searching for and just hope for the best results.
I couldn't agree with that anymore, man. And it all starts, and that's one of my biggest themes that I'm always going to be sharing in this podcast is understanding yourself. I mean, virtually every, Sam Harris, the guy that I use for the meditation app, who also has a great podcast I recommend checking out. He always talks about how nearly every single misstep you take in your life is just a lack of understanding yourself in the situation and being able to look and stop for a second and say, okay, is this really what I should be doing right now? Does this align with the kind of life? Does this next step I'm about to take align with the kind of life I want to have? I mean, nearly everything is just a lack of misunderstanding. And I have a great example of this, and it's a very unfortunate example. It's at the time you and I are recording this, last, I guess, night here, it would have been during the day in New Zealand, the shooting that the mass shooting that happened there. It's over bigotry and misunderstanding and just not properly understanding and hating because you can't understand. The person who committed that was Islamophobic. It just doesn't understand the other you can not want to participate in somebody's faith and things like that, but you're not taking the time to understand it. And nearly every single problem in this world is based on that. It's based on not understanding yourself. Why do I hate that person because they're Muslim or a different skin color than me, or because they like different music or they vote different politically than me? It's like if you take a step back and understand, that person's just different than me. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just different than me. And it's like I was watching something last night after that happened, and it's just like ironic that when America was moving out west here, they called the Native Americans savages, right? Yeah. And really, who's the savage in that equation? Because the Americans that were moving out west were basically decimating the Native American tribes. Who's the savage? The savage is you. You're the one committing the atrocity, right? And it's not just I'm not some like America hater. I love living where I do. I love this country. But it's like you just have to be objective, right? It's like who's the one doing this here? It's just like last night in the shooting in that church. It's like who's the savage? It's you. You're the one committing this crime. You're the one committing this heinous act. But again, I go back to it's not properly understanding and being introspective. And I think that's one of the biggest failures of our culture right now is we have so many people running around who just they don't understand themselves and they don't understand anybody else. And when you have both those things, it's a recipe for disaster. And you have this, it's global. It exists in Europe. It exists in America. It exists in Asia. It exists everywhere throughout the globe. And it's just a lack of like growth. I mean, that's such a basic thing. It's not hard to understand. At least I don't think.
I completely agree. I've always found that so ridiculous. I don't understand why people divide themselves into groups in terms of where they live, what they believe in, what's the color of their skin, or whatever the case might be. We're literally one species. We all experience the same similar things.
Exactly. And you know what's interesting? The reason that people feel that way and do that kind of things is deeply rooted in our evolution, our biology. It's because, if you think about it like this, we used to live in smaller groups and smaller tribes, and everybody in our tribe looked like us, right? So if some invader came in to look different, that's terrifying. I mean, that honestly, back then, that's a horrifying experience. That happened for so long that it's encoded in us in our DNA and in our brains, right? So, but is that a good excuse to live like that? You should. We have the information. What I just said and what I talked about. I'm not a trained like evolutionary biologist or psychologist or something like that. I've just read and I understand enough about that, and that's the same reason I actually wrote an article about this before. That's the same reason that people like sports are so big in America. American football is so big here, and that's the reason that like people love the Pittsburgh Steelers where I live and hate the New England Patriots. There's no actual rationality in that at all. I mean, both teams have players. Majority of players are not from the cities. I mean, virtually none actually. For the most part, they're just playing and wearing a jersey. Well, that's the same thing of like it goes back to our tribal nature, our tribalistic nature, where we would go to war with another tribe, and we just wanted our tribe to win because it meant good results for us. And that's again, it's not that simple, but that's definitely there. But again, what the point you made, it's like we're one species. We should be past this phase. I mean, especially in the information age, and that's why I go back to why is this stuff not taught in education? I mean, seriously. That would solve so many problems. Hey, the reason why you might feel, disdain towards a culture you don't understand is because this is where you came from. This is how this happened. Why should I have to learn? Why should I didn't learn that till I was like 22 years old. I should learn that in first grade. Right? It drives me nuts, man. And, we could solve a lot of problems, a lot of tragedies. We just fucking actually... I'm about to get mad, so I'm just going to calm down. But, I mean, we really could solve so many problems in this world if we just oriented ourselves properly and made sure that the younger upcoming generations learn stuff that was actually relevant and actually mattered,
I think this goes back to the point that we were discussing during the last episode as well. It goes back to the fact that, no one is really interested in how to be as humane as possible in order to how to function as a person, rather than people are basing their feelings and they're basing their emotions on some sort of specified facts or specified information that it might not be even relevant to the specific case. But no one is really trying and aiming to have an objective view of the matter. But it's I think it's a tragic thing. It really is.
I mean, but, I guess the real problem is there's not like an easy solution. Virtually everything we talk about on this podcast, there's not really an easy solution for any of this stuff.
Yeah.
The problem is it takes nuance, right? It takes nuance to understand the details of a problem and of a situation. It's never as simple as just you read something and you glance over it and you glance over the next. It's not like that. And that's the problem. One of my biggest things with education is it's very unnuanced in a lot of ways. Good teachers that I've had were very nuanced. Quite possibly, going back to what I was talking about, the best teacher I ever had, I hated him at the time, was in like my 10th grade year, which had been like my sophomore year of high school, was a guy who he spent a month teaching us. It was a global studies class where we were learning about, other cultures and stuff. He spent a month teaching us about Islam. And the reason he did it was because I grew up in a community that was literally like 98% white, and everybody was Christian. And everybody hated Muslims, especially because, I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of people did, because of 9/11 happening here and, all that stuff. So what he did was so good and so true. It was true education for the people in my class and stuff like that, because we understood their faith, and then we walked away. It's like, oh, these people are like us, They want the same thing. They want the same things in life. They want to be happy. They want to have rewarding lives. No matter what your belief system is, you want to have rewarding lives. We all want the same thing. We want to be cared for. We want to care for other people. But, then there's, of course, evil people that aren't like that. But the majority of people, almost everybody's like that. Yeah. And it's a shame that, in the world today, that you have people like what happened last night, like what we were talking about with the shooting in New Zealand, that defy that. There's always going to be people, outliers that defy that. But everybody, we want the same things, no matter what we look like, where we're from, what language we speak. Yeah. It doesn't matter. We all want the same things.
This is the essence. Yeah, this is the essence of the human nature. You know, we follow the same basic instincts regardless of where you're coming from.
Yeah.
You know, you desire happiness, you desire fulfillment, you have instinctive needs regardless of their nature. And everyone on this earth, every person on this earth is based on this very same concept. So regardless of how you are dressed, regardless of what you do on your Sundays or whatever the case might be, it's all the same. You want to be fed, you want to be in your comfort zone, you want to, to have a family, to be understood, to be happy, to have a sense of fulfillment. So I don't think that's that hard to understand,
It's just something that is foreign to a large majority of people. I mean, I understand why. It's just hard for me to. The part that's hard for me to understand is why it's not taught.
Yeah.
Like, if I ever have kids someday, that is something that will be one of the first things I teach them and instill in them is, hey, no matter what somebody looks like, what's how they talk, blah, blah. I mean, a perfect example, Hristo, is you and I, because you've grown up halfway across the world from me in a smaller community, and I grew up in a smaller community here. Your native language is not English, right? Your native language is Bulgarian, correct?
Yeah, correct, yeah.
And you and I want the same things in life. We want exactly the same things. We react to things the same way. Guess what? Because you and I are the same species. Amazing, right? We're both Homo sapiens. We're both human beings. We want the same things. It's not hard to understand. It's not like I'm a cat and you're a dog. That's not how it works. Like, it's just not that hard for people to understand. And I could go on about this all day. We should wrap this up. But seriously, I mean, I just can't. It's hard for me to understand sometimes.
It really is hard, and it really is very frustrating for me as well. And I think that's one of the reasons that we subconsciously were attracted to the concept of music as a culture as well.
Yes.
Because with music, we were, we all based our participation into the culture of the whole community based on our human perceptions,
Yes.
With music, it's not important where you're coming from, what language you speak. If you relate to the words, if you relate to the emotion, you form a community there, which is such an important aspect that can be applied everywhere, And it should be applied to everywhere, but I guess I kind of agree with you that that's a bit easier said than done, and it requires a lot of effort, but I think it's something that it's a winning example,
It's a generational struggle, like we were talking about in the last episode. It's something that our generation is going to have to instill and fight for, because, as we're becoming a globally integrated, species, now it's like there's no excuse for not understanding that. There's literally no excuse. I mean, I could understand in the the 1940s and 50s, like World War II kind of thing, looking, Americans or Europeans looking at the Japanese and thinking there's some foreign species, because you just didn't have experience with them, right? Like, I mean, ethically, morally, and scientifically, that's not true, right? But
not at all.
I couldn't blame somebody then because they didn't have that experience. Now, we have experience with all peoples of all cultures, right? So there is no excuse anymore. There's no excuse for that. And the only way that, it's now, in my opinion, is somebody's fault if they think like that. It's up to you. You have the power to overcome that yourself and become educated and learn about these things, because we live in the information age. That's why it's called the information age, right? And because the information is available to you. That's why. Yeah, I was about to go into education rant, but we've been going for like an hour now. But honestly, I think at the end of the day, my main theme in this episode has been, take your negative emotions, your negative experiences, even like me getting mad about, what I was just talking about.
Yeah.
Like, me being mad about that isn't going to solve any of those problems. but me going and writing a song, or you know, going to the gym and working out, or writing an
or
article,
even expressing your thoughts right now.
Yeah,
can
or
change
exactly.
the perceptions of the listener.
It's so much better to me to express them through this platform, which is why I'm so happy we've done this, than me to go scream at my wall. I mean, what would that solve? Nothing.
Yeah.
It would solve nothing. And I think that's truly how we're going to change the world. Not just you and I, but people in general, is people doing this, right? What you and I are doing right now, making a platform for ourselves to spread positivity and encouragement and, you know, bold action and courageous action, and to stand up. Because you know what, man? There's a lot of people out in this world that I know that would not be willing to talk about what you and I are talking about right now.
Not at all.
And it's just a choice to do it. And that's what I leave you guys with today. So that's how I feel.
I honestly have nothing to add to that. I think that's such a great point to finish on. So,
all right. Well, thank you guys so much. As always, second episode's now in the books. We'll see you next time for episode number 3 on the Boldcast.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Boldcast. You can support the show by leaving a review on whatever platform you listen on. Make sure to connect with us on Facebook and Instagram. You can find us on both at the Boldcast.